IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
So for me, I don't think any adoptee is okay with not knowing, because it's like I keep saying, it's like reading a book and not having the first 20 pages. And our identity is so precious and it's so subjective and it's so personal, and there's so many things that people take for granted, like a birth certificate, or the first thing that you ask is, who's your mother, what do your parents do? We don't have that sort of, we don't have our own identity. And a lot of people, it's difficult to explain that, yes, of course, we are getting a home, a family, a life, and a better life or a better family or whatever. Again, it's so subjective, right? But we're also giving up so much of our own identity, our lineage, our whatever family we might have, whatever history associated with it, our own birth certificate. I have a fake birth certificate because that's a part of the process. So to not be allowed the truth of your own identity, it's crippling. It's like saying that you don't exist.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. A few weeks back, many of you would remember that I had done an episode with Paulami Pavini Shukla, the Supreme Court lawyer, who's also the flag bearer for orphan rights in India. That was episode 127, entitled Why India's Orphans Are Abandoned Twice. The episode created quite a few conversations, both on Twitter as well as offline. Many of you had reached out to me to share your feelings on that particular episode, and I am eternally grateful for that. It also helped me make new friends from communities of adoptees, and I really will cherish those relationships for a very, very long time to come. One such person, who's now also a dear friend, is actually my guest today. Ujaala Chaudhuri is a media industry professional and currently hustles as a film and literary agent, representing writers, directors, and producers from across the country. Ujaala is also an adoptee, something that she came to know from her mother when she was 15 years old, except she had already heard from the world around her by then. Ujaala wears the adoptee tag proudly, but is critical of the way in which adoption is carried out today in India, where largely the adoptee is not a part of most of the key decisions. Ujaala is also trying to create a vibrant community of adoptees, which is critical in a journey that is otherwise extremely lonely. She's also in the process of creating a narrative documentary film on her own story titled Implosion, for which she is seeking funding. We'll speak about all of this in just a bit. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Habit Coach, Ashton meets Devangana Mishra. She is the CEO and founder of Brain Bristle, and this Autism Awareness Month, they discuss how we can understand autism better. The Simplified hosts ponder over how form dictates content, whether it's going from CDs to streaming or blogs to Twitter. On Voices for Water, Karthik talks to Dr. Veena Srinivasan. She is the lead of the Center for Social and Environmental Innovation. They deep dive into the importance of investing in water waste treatment. On Say No to Drama, Chetna tells us why work friends are essential and how they influence our overall performance. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk analyze the implications of China's genetic resource guidelines. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on, including the one you're listening to us on now. And also, please do check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're all available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to help us understand you, the listener, better, and how you like our shows, how you respond to the advertising, and so on. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Ujaala. How are you doing?
I'm good. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story how we connected. It's wonderful because it had to do with an episode we had done some time back. But I get ahead of myself. Tell me about growing up.
Well, I'm originally from Calcutta. I've been living in Bombay for the past 17 years now. Growing up in Calcutta was actually a lot of fun because I had a lot of exposure to a lot of the arts and culture because my mom used to work with the British Council. So I remember growing up as a kid, I was constantly initially it was dragged along, but after that I was a very happy goer to a lot of film festivals and music and art and theater and poetry and books and all of that. So it was good. I had a great education. I went to some of the best schools and of course one out of the maybe five colleges that we have in Calcutta. And yeah, I had a good life, decent fun set of friends. And yeah, I was there till I finished college, and then I think I ran away or I ran off to Bombay. So, yeah, it's good.
You are an adoptee.
Yes.
Tell us about how you came to know that you're an adoptee.
So, it was a very interesting way in which I found out. I think I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And my mother's best friend and her daughter had come for a visit to Calcutta, and we were all sitting around the breakfast table. I don't think my mother was there that morning. Her daughter just blurted out saying that, do you know that you're adopted? And I was like, I was a bit taken aback, and I'm like, huh? And she was like, yeah, you were an orphan and now you're adopted.
How old were you?
I was about 7 or 8, I think.
Right.
And I remember running into the room and I pulled out this dictionary that I had, and I remember looking up the word orphan, and I felt really upset because it basically said that whose biological parents are dead or they're not there anymore. And then I looked up the word adopted, and I was very confused because all this were new words and new terms and different language that I wasn't familiar with. And I just remember that I burst into tears because it was all very confusing. So I remember at some point going up, and of course, at that time at the breakfast table, there were a lot of apologies, and my mom's friends were like, "Come on, don't say that." And, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it." And they kind of tried to cover that up. And I remember going to my mom and asking her, "Am I adopted?" And she was like, "No, what are you talking about?" Then I went up to my grandmom, who was bringing me up, and I asked her the same thing, and she was like, "No, where did you hear this from?" And of course not. And I remember over a period of years, I would keep asking the same question, and they would keep kind of saying no, no, no. And then I think I got a bit smarter. So I started asking my mom and grandmom, what time was I born? And every time I asked that question, the answer would change. So by the time, I had done quite a few rounds of this, I was kind of convinced that this was true. And for some reasons, they hadn't told me. And I remember in school also, a classmate of mine, and she was quite a bully actually. She came to me and she was like, you were thrown in the dustbin, and your mother now, she picked you out of the dustbin and all of that. And I started crying again because, again, this was so new and I didn't know why people were speaking to me like that. And they were supposed to be my friends. And I remember when we left school in class 10, when we finished our exams and all of that, and we used to have these books where you'd kind of write these great auto, like this, "Oh, it was great knowing you and have a great life," and all of that. And she wrote for me. She was like, "I remember in class, whatever, whatever, and I said that you were thrown in the dustbin, and after that, my ears were twisted, and I was made to stand in the back of the class, and, I still remember that memory." And, so I think it seemed like a lot of people knew, but I didn't know. And also, my adoptive mother, she's very fair, and so is my grandmother. I was brought up with by my grandmother and mother, and they both are very, very fair because they're Parsi. And she married my father, who was a Bengali, and my father died when I was about 7. So I remember being brought up by these very different looking women. And I kept telling myself that, you know what, even if I don't look like them, must be because my father must have looked like me. And because he was no more, it seemed like something that would work, and I kind of convinced myself that this was what it was. So, yeah, so that's how I found out. And it was only when I turned 16 that my mom told me, she sat me down and she was like, I want to tell you, you were adopted, and, you adopted from the missionaries of charity. And, what, and I would like for you to come by and meet Mother Teresa, and we should go and go and see the sisters over there. There was a sister Nirmala who used to work at the Missionaries of Charity. I remember that by then I was already so exhausted and I'd gone through all of this. I just knew, and I was like, yeah, I know, I kind of figured it out. So that's how the story went. But yeah, so we went to meet Mother Teresa, and there were quite a few pictures and everything. And yeah, that was it. But there was never really any conversation about it thereafter. I remember at a time being told that, oh, if it weren't for us, then you'd still be, you wouldn't have a home. And much later in my life, I think there were people who tell me that, oh, no one would love you, even your mom gave you up, all of that. So it's been like a journey in terms of everyone knowing and telling me about how I should feel and what I should do and what the story was. And unfortunately, it was much, much, much later, maybe a few years ago, that I actually sat my adoptive mother down and asked her that, why didn't you tell me? And she was like, I didn't know how to. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know whether I could tell you. So, yeah, that was the journey of my story.
Right. I'm just going back to your time in school and the incident that you spoke about when someone came home. It's almost like everybody else except you knew something and you didn't, which I don't think I can visualize or imagine how that must feel like. And after that incident, you trying to speak to your mother, what would you tell yourself? How sure were you that you would adopt until you were told that is? And did you have conflicting opinions on that? Were you trying to tell yourself that maybe you were not?
So, honestly, I knew from the day that conversation happened at the breakfast table, and the way whenever I'd ask my mother what time I was born and how the time kept changing, that I knew that this is true. I feel that I also saw that I looked nothing like, even when I looked at pictures of my father, whatever memories I had of him, there was no sort of similarity or anything. And I also know that, the conversations were always very secretive. So even if growing up, the thing is, and I do remember this growing up as a child, that I had what we call a homecoming ceremony where I was brought home, and there was a little party, and then I was being passed around from, arm to arm and arm. And I vaguely remember that as a child because I remember feeling very uncomfortable and out of place. And when I was looking at those pictures, I remember thinking that because I was just told, oh, this is, when you were a baby. Of course, it connects back right now. And I remember.
So how old were you when you were adopted?
I was adopted when I was 8 months old. So I remember when I was looking at those pictures, and, there'd be people in the house, and, we'd be sharing a lot of photographs, and the conversations were always very hush hush. So that it was always like I was regarded as this sort of beautiful gift that came into my parents' life, and how lucky I was. Yeah, so it was very confusing because I have no siblings growing up, and also because my parents, when they were much older, so there's a huge age gap between me and my adoptive mom. So I'm about 42 and she's about 80. So there's like a very long, there's a very big gap between us. So I feel like conversations were not as frequent or regular or very hush hush, and I was always I wasn't encouraged to talk about it. I
Right.
always felt that this was a very ambiguous topic and it wouldn't really get me anywhere with any real answers. All I was told is that how much I was loved and how I was taken care of and how everyone was doing so much for me. And that, in a way, made me feel that, okay, this grateful narrative was something that I had to play out for years and for years and years. So, yeah, it was very confusing. I felt a bit of an outsider because I think over the years I've grown into someone who's very intuitive and relies a lot in terms of my own gut and how I feel. And I feel at that point growing up, it was made very difficult for me to do that. And I think I eventually just gave in to this whole gratitude narrative. And I remember determining my relationship with someone by telling them this secret. So if I really liked you, if I wanted to really share things, and growing up as kids, secrets are big things, right? You meet with friends and it's always about secrets and it's always this and that. And I would, really decide and choose my friends by whether I got to tell them that I was adopted or not. And it was met with a lot of confusing responses, which also made the whole story even more blurry and confusing for me. So, yeah, I don't think this conversation was ever really, really had.
Right. And I'm just going back and thinking the fact that these photos existed, like when you came home, that must have been a very strange thing for you, right? Like normally on any given day, no one does that with an 8-month-old baby. They would have crossed that stage. And how did your relationship with your adoptive mom sort of change and evolve through these, years when you were 10, 15 years old until, you were in your 20s?
I lost my adoptive father when I was about 7 or 8. He was terminally ill and he'd been ill for a while. So I don't have much of a memory of spending time with him because he was really sick. Either he was really sick at home and I wasn't allowed to go near him because he was really unwell, or he was in hospital. So I have very few memories of him. And when he passed on, my mom got so busy taking care of the house, and my grandmom had kind of moved and from Bombay to come and take care of me. I really didn't get to see much of my mother either because she was either working this really hectic, crazy job, or I was at school, or she'd come home. I'd maybe get a couple of hours with her, and then I'd go to bed because I was still in school. So for many, many years, yes, my mom did everything for me. She gave me great education. There was never any problem of any sort of hustle for food or any sort of, I mean, she gave me the basics, but I never really got much of her time or attention because she was always working or at work. My grandmom actually brought me up. So my relationship with my grandmom was very, very, very strong, and she was always there. So when I'd come home from school, she was there. When I'd go down and play and come up, she'd be there. Before I went to bed, she was there. When I woke up in the morning, she was there. So she became my constant. But my mom, not really. And I feel like I always struggled in my relationship with her, and I couldn't really understand why, because as a human being she was incredible and everyone loved her, and she was doing really well in her career, and she was really, really, really admired, respected, loved by everyone. And she was a bit of a celebrity growing up while I was growing up in Calcutta.
What is the line of work, if I may?
So she basically comes from a background of theater and drama. So she studied that, and then she worked with the British Council. So she was what they called as a cultural officer, which basically meant any sort of acts coming in from the United Kingdom into India. She basically was on top of all of that, and any artist or talent going to the United Kingdom, with all these scholarships and whatever we call fellowships, were mostly because of her. So that's why my growing up, there was a lot of culture, there were a lot of this thing that I had a lot of exposure to all the arts, fine arts and all of it. Yeah, so I was very confused because I'd be like, I don't feel so connected to my mother, but everyone loves her, so there must be something really wrong with me. And I felt that my deepest connection was always with my grandmom because she was always there. So growing up, I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with my mother, and it was difficult to have real conversations when we did, because I was very, 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 very protected. So for example, if I had to go across the road and hang out with a friend, I would be chaperoned. So my life was very, very, very protective. And of course, as I got into school, and then relationships and friendships and all of that, and it got a little more complicated because my mom remarried, and I mean, things didn't work out. So I just felt like growing up, there was so much going on at home. And because by then had kind of got used to being fiercely independent and being the sort of person who would be like, things are not okay, or if things not working out, I'll take care of myself. So from a very young and early age, I've basically been, saying it's fine. I don't need anyone. I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm all right. So yeah, but over the when I was in college, things got okay. Then when I finished college, it was okay, and I realized that when I got done with college and I had an opportunity to move to Bombay, back then I thought that, oh my God, this is great. I have this opportunity. I'm going to come to Bombay. I'm going to be in the movies and I'm going to be in media and entertainment and I'm going to be like a version of my mom. There was that bit of kind of idealized her. There's so much respect. There was so much of admiration. So I wanted to be a version of her with my career because that's all I had actually seen of her, the way she's built her career and how she was at her work and all of that. And it's much later in hindsight that I realized that I was just running away from home because I didn't,
Hmm.
I didn't want to be a part of that setup, or I was actually really, it was time for me to make my own life.
Hmm.
So, yeah. So, and when I did that, there was a lot of support and encouragement. So, I feel that way in terms of whatever I wanted to do or wherever I wanted to go or be. There's always been a lot of encouragement and support. And, I've had her as a huge example of, how one can really be met with a lot of challenges and hardships and yet be able to excel at their work and career, and being a single parent and being a woman in a predominantly male dominated industry and all of that. So there's a lot of admiration and respect that I had when I left and came to Bombay. And then it was more of a, are you okay? Do you need anything? And we weren't really close. And I think, right. And then there was a time when we weren't close at all. We were hardly speaking. And I think it's right now, once I've come into a lot of self awareness and understanding, that I've, kind of renewed our relationship. And even now, topics of conversation are difficult because I remember a while ago I spoke to my mom and I said that, hey, tell me about my adoption, tell me about what happened, tell me, speak to me. But she's old, and I feel like there's a lot of difficulties and pain and hurt also associated with so much of my growing up that she doesn't want to talk about it. And I feel like right now she's old, and I don't think it's fair of me to push her to, do that. And I want her now to, be okay, and I want to be able to take care of her. And so that has also meant a lot of important conversations are not to be had. So
Hmm. When your mom told you that you were adopted, something that you had known probably at that point for a while, and did you try retracing your journey? Did you try again to know more about your birth parents?
So I've always been very, 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 very curious about it. I've always had this sort of, and it's actually referred to as a fantasy that adoptees have, that where they kind of imagine a reunion of sorts, or they imagine that the birth parent, would either write to them or show up, come, and a lot of the associations have been very romantic. So I've always thought that, oh, okay, one day I'm going to open my inbox and I'm going to see this email from my birth father or my birth mother saying, hey, here we are, or a letter will arrive, or someone's going to ring the bell. So I've had those sort of fantasy thoughts, and I tried to bring up the conversation. But I remember that one time I did, it really upset my mother and grandmother. And because it upset my grandmother so much, I didn't want to pursue it because I felt very, very guilty, and I felt that this grateful narrative had been entrenched so deeply in my system. There was no way out of it. And I of course I kept harboring it. And in fact, I remember when I turned 40 a couple of years ago, that I had this sort of epiphany where every year on my birthday I would feel really sad, and I would not understand where that feeling was coming from. And it's much later at that age where I realized that every year on my birthday I actually think about my birth mother. I keep thinking, does she remember? Has she forgotten? Is this something that she never wants to talk about? Is this something that she will never forget? Is this something that she doesn't want to remember? All these thoughts come in. And yeah, and it's because the topic of adoption in India and the system is a closed one. It's difficult to be able to think more about it, because it'll just be like I mean, what do I do with these thoughts? Where do I go with them? And unfortunately, I mean, as hard as I've tried to reach out and find a community of fellow adoptees or anywhere I can go to where I can be able to have these really difficult conversations. I'm kind of running against so many walls because no one's really talking about it, and even if they are, there's so much shame and secrecy and taboo attached to it, and the system's a closed one. There's so many people that I've spoken to, and during the course of the conversation it's been like, oh, my niece is adopted, or my cousin is adopted, but we don't talk about it at home. It's there's so much of that. So it's never really been a conversation starter, and it's only now because I'm in touch with so many international adoptees, interracial adoptees. I've actually had to go out of my own country to find that community, which is what is so, I don't know what adjective to use, but it's crazy. Like, I should be able to go somewhere, go to something, or know where to go where I can reach out and have difficult conversations or ask these questions. And what do? I want to find my birth mother. How do I go about it? Or even like, is it even normal to have these feelings? Right? Because at the end of the day, the narrative is that you were relinquished, or you were abandoned, or no one, you were given up. So obviously, what's the point of going back and looking into that when you know that the life you have right now is so much better? But that really isn't an answer,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I felt that in this entire process of adoption, I think the biggest ask that the process asks of is from the child. And the expectation is for you to be able to be okay with not knowing. And I think systemically, they ensure that it is difficult for someone to know. As an adoptee, are you ever able to make peace with that line of thinking?
So for me,
That I'm okay to not know?
I don't think any adoptee is okay with not knowing, because it's like I keep saying, it's like reading a book and not having the first 20 pages. And our identity is so precious, and it's so subjective, and it's so personal. And there's so many things that people take for granted, like a birth certificate, or the first thing that you ask is, who's your mother? What do your parents do? We don't have that sort of, we don't have our own identity. And a lot of people, it's difficult to explain that. Yes, of course, we are getting a home, a family, a life, and a better life, or a better family, or whatever. I mean, again, it's so subjective, right?
Yeah.
But we're also giving up so much of our own identity, our lineage, our whatever family we might have, whatever history associated with it, our own birth certificate. I have a fake birth certificate.
Yeah.
Because that's a part of the process. So to not be allowed the truth of your own identity, it's crippling. It's like saying that you don't exist, but we do. And to be able to be okay with taking on someone else's identity without knowing your own, it's not right. No one should get to make that choice for us.
Yeah.
You don't get to choose whether I want to know about my birth parents. You don't get to choose whether I decide to want to meet them or know about them, or those are not anyone's decisions to make other than us, and you don't get to tell our story for us. And I feel that's the main thing. This conversation of adoption, especially in India, doesn't take into account the adoptee voice. It's about adoption, it's about the parents, about the system, it's about everything else. What about us? Who's listening to us? No one.
Yeah, as you know, because I'm an adoptive parent, and what you said about the birth certificates is something that troubles me a lot. Like, my daughter's 5 now, and her birth certificate is not accurate information. So about 5 or 6 of the children from that center had the same birth time and date. Obviously, someone was filling a bunch of forms, and I always felt that's in my book. Those are initial pages that I'm missing. I don't know when she was actually born. Right? A lot of this I understand is a process for a reason, and probably whoever created the system did that with the best of intentions. But like you rightly said, like I had said a little earlier as well, I feel the most that we ask for among all stakeholders is from the child, which is tragic, right? What could be better?
I think the system needs to be a more transparent and honest system where there is information available. Now, of course, it's up to the parents' discretion on when they need to share that information with the child, but that information needs to be available. Who the parents are, where they come from, what is their lineage, how many brothers and sisters, what are all of that, and even from a genetic perspective towards just your own medical awareness. Today, if I have cancer, if I have diabetes or any of that, because these are all genetic inherent conditions, I have no clue. And that's not fair. So I feel like the system needs to be an open, more transparent system where any birth mother or father giving up the child needs to fill in these details, needs to provide information, provide numbers, provide. I'm not saying that, of course, you have to go and, be best friends with them and, maintain that sort of, keep all the channels of communication open. That is so subjective. That totally depends on, how you decide to bring up the child. But that information needs to be available,
Hmm.
and I remember that speaking to another adoptive parent, and she told me, she said that, we've had this conversation with our children saying that, please feel free to talk about this feeling of whatever these feelings are. And I remember she sharing that her son does think about his birth mother, even though he has no information, no details, nothing. He just says that I was thinking of her today, and I feel that openness and communication is so important.
Hmm.
I remember listening to another podcast where one of the adoptive parents, she brought up the adoptee saying that, I don't know what your mother looks like, but I think you look just as beautiful as I'm sure she is. And, including the birth parents as a part of an active conversation, and that's important to be able to recognize that your child does come from another, I mean, does have another life before coming into yours. Because what happens is that just makes the conversation so much more open, makes it so much more relevant. People can come together and help each other, right? Because every case is so subjective. I can't tell you what I feel you should do with your child or, bringing her up. But I can definitely say that, transparency and honesty goes a very long way. At the end of the day, as an adoptee, what I feel is we just need to know that you're there. We just need to know that in case we have any sort of feelings or emotions or anything, we can go to you, and it will be a conversation that can be had. You don't have to have all the answers, and that's okay. But for me to be able to come to you and say, hey, listen, I've been having these thoughts. I've been thinking about this. I just wanted to share. And to have that space. And also to be able to say that, okay, maybe let's go and look. Maybe let's go and find out information. And to be able to do it with them. I think that's what needs to change. And to do away with how adoption is looked at, from the perspective of, even the media. I mean, it's just dark, dingy, grey, often, a lot of stories start with, oh, she was an orphan, which basically determines how she's going to turn out in life. So that those conversations need to have. How you use the language also is important. Like I've been told, like recently, and this is someone who's, someone who knows me well, said something like, oh, I keep wondering why my dog and you get on so well and are so have such a great connection. Oh, it's because you're both strays and you're both adopted. I've heard things like this growing up, and these are coming from people who are supposed to be in your circle, are your lot of people. But to hear these things can be really triggering, because that's not really how you speak to any person.
Right.
So I feel like the language of adoption needs to change. I feel the system and how it looks at adoption needs to change. I feel the communities need to be stronger and be able to do this better.
You spoke about transparency, and you mentioned earlier that your mom spoke to you when you were about 15 or so. I think the general consensus, though it is never, I don't think adoptive parents are really trained on this much. They just figure this out.
Yeah.
But the general consensus on this is that the child should hear it from you and not from anybody else, which basically means it should be much earlier.
Yeah.
What do you think is the right time for an adoptive parent to have that conversation with the child?
So again, it's a very subjective thing, but personally, I feel, and of course, I speak on behalf of fellow adoptees like myself, would be as soon as possible. As soon as you feel that you have established that sort of bond and relationship with your child, that the child trusts you, that the child is able to find you wherever, in any sort of room, in any sort of conversation, in any sort of moment. So, and that also takes a while, because Of course, it takes a bit to connect and to be able to, as I'm sure you're aware, the journey is not an instant gratification one. It takes a lot of effort. But I feel that the parents need to constantly be able to keep working on themselves and keep evolving and keep getting better and keep, saying that, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to, not get complacent or not really give in. And, once the child sees that as a safe space, sees that as a space where openness and sharing is possible, and as soon as that, I mean, there's no real age. It could be anything. I mean, it totally depends on how ready your relationship, or what is the state of the parent and the child relationship.
Right.
I think that's what I would say. But general consensus is, of course, as soon as possible, which I feel is really subjective, because what if you haven't established that sort of, I mean, you could have adopted someone when they're 5 years old. At that stage, do you have that sort of relationship to share this? I mean, are you ready for it? Because it's about the parents being as ready as the child, because the parents have to deal with all of that comes with it.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you ready to take that on?
Yeah.
So it's adopting a child and being able to be ready to take on that are very different things. And it's not just about the journey of the child, it's about the journey of the parents as parents and as a family together. So then it's not just one thing.
Right.
So yeah.
I started the episode by saying, Ujaala, you're an adoptee. And I used it as though like it's a label. And I did that deliberately because I feel, and I don't know if I'm right in doing this, I feel that should be normalized. And
Absolutely. I'm proud to be called an adoptee. I really am.
I was just going to ask you, what is your relationship with that term?
So it's been a very confusing relationship, because I found out by mistake, and then there was a lot of hesitation and resistance to any conversation about it. And then where I put my foot down and said, what, if I'm not getting answers from here, I'm going to go looking for answers, and I'm going to find a community, and if it doesn't exist, try and create it. My relationship, of course, with the word adoptee has changed from being one where I'm like, oh, I'm the grateful adoptee, so I have to be grateful for everything. And it gets exhausting, because sometimes you just want to put that down and say, what, I don't need to be grateful for something where I might not be treated well. Just because I'm not speaking about myself, but there are a lot of adoptees who are adopted and they face a lot of domestic abuse. But the narrative is so instilled that, I have to be grateful. This is what they know and they're okay with it. So, I mean, there are situations like that. And for me right now, I'm a proud adoptee. I'm an adoptee who wants to reach out and connect with other adoptees, because we do have so much to share. We do want to make this a better way of doing things for everyone, especially ourselves. And yeah, I mean, it's important. Our voice is important and we need to be heard, and we will. So please start listening. So
you sounded like in your journey growing up, you could never find that safe space to ask all the questions you had, the difficult ones especially. And I'm assuming it must also have been difficult for you to figure out who your trust circle for this conversation is. And then you mentioned, this will be that secret you'll share with the person who you want to be in your life. You also then figured out that there is a larger community of adoptees. Talk to us about that journey and what that meant to you.
So first, like I said, that I would kind of share with people who I felt I would want in my life. And I feel like most of the times I was so disappointed with the response, because it was the same standard. Oh, you're so lucky. Or, oh, okay, you must be so grateful, standard response. And I was just like, oh my God, this is exhausting and it's getting so heavy, this whole gratitude narrative. And then I started proudly saying it. I was just like, it wasn't a secret for me anymore. I would want to tell everyone. So when you make new friends and, when you meet new people, or, friends, whatever, partners, whoever, it was something that was an important part of my story. And I started taking a lot of pride in it. I didn't have a lot of answers to a lot of questions. And I understood a lot of the responses were kind of dictated or determined by how adoption was looked at in general. So it was either like the whole grateful and lucky narrative, or it was like, oh, you poor thing, oh, okay. And of course, the ones who stood out for me were the ones who would ask me difficult questions like, so what does it feel like, and what is your biggest fear, or do you want to look for your parents, all of that. And a lot of times the conversations would be very difficult to explain. Like, I have a really close friend of mine, and we were having this conversation about, the reunion, which is when the adoptees connect and meet their biological mother mostly, but it could also be the father. And he was like, but why do you want to do it? Why do you want to go back into more uncertainty without any guarantee how that would turn out? Why would you put yourself through that? You've gone through so much already. Why would you want to take on that? Isn't that more exhausting? I was so difficult to explain to him, and he's someone who cares about me. He loves me. He's a friend. He means well. And I remember having the same conversation with Chris. In fact, I think Chris. He's a international adoptee, Chris Rao, and
Right.
he was like, "I totally get it. I didn't have to explain it. I didn't have to, go through the whole thing of saying, this is what I feel and this is what it should be and this is what it is." He's like, "I get it. I get it." And that's the thing about creating this community for me, because I know that there's so many like me. We all have so much to share, and we all feel the same way about so many things. So why refrain ourselves? Why do we continue feeling that we're alone on this journey when we're not? So reaching out to other, through this community of adoptees was such a relief. It was like I'd finally taken this huge burden that I'd been carrying for years and put it down. And I'm like, you know what? I'm at peace now. I'm okay. There are more like me. I know I can call or speak to them, and I don't need to over explain myself. I don't need to, certain ways of behavior also. So for an adoptee, a very common behavioral pattern is the sort of, like, it's I forget the term. It's essentially how an adoptee lives a very dichotomous life for a very long time, because on one hand they know that they've been abandoned, so that fear of abandonment never goes away. So at the same time, they always have their defenses up, and they have this thing where they lash out, so they really try and get really difficult with their parents, the family, friends, partners, and they don't realize they're doing it. But it's more like, how far can I push this person into leaving me? Because I know that's going to happen, because it's happened before, but actually we don't want that to happen, you know. So there's certain ways of behavior where I know if I try and speak to a friend who doesn't really get it, it'll be difficult. It'll be a difficult conversation, but I know I can call up Chris or a fellow adoptee and say, "Hey, this is what's happening and it's so difficult." And I know that that support and understanding will be there, which is why it's so important, I feel, and I'm on this journey right now to reach out to as many adoptees as myself. Because it's been so lonely and you felt so alone, but now you don't need to. Not now, I mean, you don't need to, full stop. And you are absolutely justified in asking however many questions you want and to feel however you do, and it's okay.
When talking about the difficult questions you would want to be asked, you said, you spoke about your biggest fears. Growing up, and feel free to not want to answer this question, what was your biggest fear?
I think growing up, and I think even now, a big fear that I have is, would I ever be able to be a good parent? Like, would I ever be able to have my own family? Because this fear of abandonment is so strong, and it's something that just leaves this mark. And you always feel, as a person, you become really, really competitive in all spheres of life, because you want to be able to excel in everything. In relationships and friendships, it's a little more difficult, because trust is a very vulnerable aspect of, your functioning. And also with that is also really, like, I love kids. I love, I always wanted to have kids. I enjoy being with kids. I feel like I'm at my best when I'm in the company of kids. But I've always doubted, would I make a good mom? Would I make a good parent? I've been abandoned. What if I do that to my child? What if I'm not there for my child? And that's what I know, because that's what I've seen, growing up. So yeah, for me to really feel that I can be a good parent, that I can have a good family life, that I can be abandoned, but I doesn't mean that I will abandon or I will be abandoned again, So yeah, I think that's one of my biggest fears.
This whole thing also make you very extremely fiercely independent, like
Oh,
ready
hell
for
yeah.
anything.
Yeah. I think it's just, I don't know what, it's a self-defense mechanism that kicks in, and you're just like, your brain is telling you that, listen, you're pretty much on your own and you have to figure it out. And I've been like that, I mean, growing up, and it's only very recently that I've learned how to ask for help. I've learned how to reach out for support. I've learned to be okay with, you know, not feeling okay, and knowing that I'm very lucky, touch wood, today I have an amazing circle of support in terms of friends and, some family members, and I have an amazing partner, so I know that today I can reach out and I can ask for help and I can be who I am, and I know that I will be supported, I will be encouraged, and that's something that I've realized on this journey, because otherwise I've always felt like an outsider. I've always felt alone. I've always felt like I don't belong. I've always felt like, no one's really going to understand,
Hmm.
and that's kept me away from a lot. And also because I'm a socially anxious person, and there's been a period in my life where I have struggled with depression. I was on medication and in therapy, and I think that was when a lot of this came in, and then I had a lot of questions about, is this who I am? Is this because of, there's a thing called intergenerational trauma, which I'm sure you've heard of. Is this what I'm going through? And so many important, difficult questions, which of course my therapist helped me with, my friends supported me with, and all of that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to that one question: who am I? Where do I come from? And I feel like that will help me go such a longer way into really, you know, reducing the fears that I have about myself, and being someone who'll say that it's okay, I've got this.
Hmm. Ujala, you're making a film. You're part of the team that is making a film called Implosion. Is it okay to talk about that?
So it's actually, so the thing is, I work in media and entertainment,
Right.
and like I said, this journey became really intense when I turned 40 a few years ago. And for me, because I come from a film background, it's the only way I know of expressing or sharing. And I reached out to a filmmaker, and she's also a friend, Malti Rao, and I said that, hey, I have this and this is what's going on. And I sent her email after email. I just put lots of bullet points, and I was like, please, do you think you'd be interested? And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So we started putting things together and doing a bit of the festival routes and kind of exploring
Right.
what this all meant and what the journey was like for me.
Why did you want to make this film?
So for me, I feel when I started having all these questions, I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to speak to. I didn't know if there was a helpline number or a website or a community I could reach out to and say, hey, listen, I'm having these thoughts of, a reunion, or I've read this book and I want to understand more about this, or this is what's happening. And where do I go? Who do I speak to? And I was struggling. I mean, I remember reaching out to friends who knew people who were adopted, and they were like, listen, they don't want to talk to you, or they don't know that they're adopted, which is another very, very common thing. So, I was banging my head against a wall, and then I went onto the internet and I found this amazing community of adoptees who none of them actually live in India. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to find that community and be able to create it. And also, this story needs to have an impact. Otherwise, I'm just going to be another one of so many stories. But how can we do this better? And adoption has opened up so beautifully to people who don't come from your regular family setups, So it's a great thing, but I feel it needs to be done in a way where the adoptee is as important a part of the conversation as the topic of adoption, which isn't there. So, I feel like through a film or through anything, if there's a way through this podcast, if there are people listening who are, you know, thinking about this in a little different way, where they're like, okay, what about the adoptee? What does he or she go through? Why is it difficult for them? I would like to know more about them. That's important.
How can they get in touch with you? Do you want them to get in touch
Yeah,
with you?
sure. I mean, anyone, please do and get in touch with me. I'm available on ujaala@gmail.com. You can write to me. I mean, I would love to talk to anyone who wants to have an honest, transparent, and open conversation about adoption, and in particular, adoptees.
I interrupted you when you were talking about the film. How's that going? You were saying how
It's
it was.
going
Yeah.
really well. I feel like we're now looking at people who'd want to look at the story. So when you do the festival rounds, it's a very different sort of cut or edit, because it's a different perspective, because adoption internationally is a very loud conversation. So the story has to be culturally interesting enough for it to be relevant, which is why we're doing the festival circuits. But in India, I'm keen to, speak about this for what it means for an Indian adoptee living in India. And I guess we're still figuring and seeing if anyone is interested to get in touch and, see how we can get this conversation going.
You are the protagonist of the film in the sense
Yeah.
it's your story, right? Is that right?
It is my story because I feel right now, I mean, of course, I'd love fellow adoptees to join me because it is a conversation.
Right.
But if I need to be the conversation starter, then so be it. And I mean, I think I just want to have these conversations, and I feel that they're not happening or no one's having them. And if that needs to be me, then hell yeah.
Right. And is your adoptive mother likely to be a part of that film?
So I told her I'm making a film about my adoption. So her first question was like, okay, which channel is it coming on? And I'm like, we're not there yet. So I told her, I mean, when we were filming a bit of it, I mean, the filmmaker wanted to film me having a video chat with my mom. So she was okay with that. And but like I said, I feel like I don't want to. I would love to share whatever is going on, and I will share my journey with her, but I wouldn't want to do it in any way that would upset her. Not because I have this guilt, which is also a very common thing that adoptees go through. Like, you don't want to have conversations about birth parents and adoption because you feel guilty, because you feel like, okay, I don't want her to feel bad, but that's not it. But I feel I want to do it. I would like to do it in a way that's thoughtful and considerate and kind towards her, because she has done a lot for me, and of course, I am very grateful, but yeah, I want to do it a little better than where I am right now.
I want to end the episode with probably the most personal question I've asked you the last hour or so, which is, of course, you must have taken a lot of effort to try and see whatever there is to know about your birth mother. And how far did it take you? Do you know anything about her?
So it's like I said, the system is a closed one. So there's a lot of paperwork involved. There are a lot of layers of bureaucratic jargon, I'd like to call it that. And of course, it's an expensive, time-consuming, uncertain process. But I've started on it, and I found a few folders in my mom's cupboard stacked away where I basically came across some legal papers which said that my mother was an unwed teenager, and I was born on the 23rd and she gave me up on the 30th. So that's a new piece of information that I've just come privy into, and the papers have just written off saying that because she couldn't take care, she relinquished the girl child. And that's as much information as I have. And I feel like if I do get an opportunity to make this into a series or docu-series in India or do something about it, I want to start with that question saying, what happened in that 1 week? What made her give me up? Was she too overwhelmed? Was it the system? Did she have any resources? Was it the same story of how will you bring up the child, or who will marry you, or what will people think, and all of that. So yeah, that's what I have right now, and which is why I'm really eager and excited to get moving on this, because I feel there are a lot of stories to be told, and I want to be the one to start telling them if I get a chance. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you very much, and I hope anyone listening here, especially adoptees, please don't ever feel that you're alone, because you're not. There are many of us, and we all have very similar feelings and emotions, and please speak up, because we are listening to each other. Thank you.
So that was our show this week. I hope you liked it. And if you did, and if you're a fan of the show, hey, I have something to ask of you. If you are listening to the show on Spotify or Apple right now, please do rate us on the respective app. It helps a lot in others discovering the show. And if you have any feedback on the show, I would love to hear from you. You can send it to filterkoffeepodcast@gmail.com. Happy listening, and see you next week with another episode.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with postcards from nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you get your podcast from.